The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of the modest two-bedroom apartment as a mother frantically pressed her hand against her young son's forehead. Her heart raced as she felt the burning heat radiating from his skin. At just 8 years old, her boy had never felt this hot before, and the thermometer's reading of 103.5 degrees Fahrenheit only confirmed her worst fears. As an elementary school teacher who had dealt with countless sick children over her decade in the classroom, she knew better than to take chances. Being a single mom had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, every fiber of her being screamed that this was serious. She quickly gathered their essential items: insurance card, wallet, and her son's favorite stuffed dinosaur that had comforted him through every illness since he was 3. The drive to Riverside Urgent Care usually took 15 minutes, but today she made it in 12, all while trying to keep her voice steady as she called back reassurances to her son who lay quietly in the back seat. The clinic's parking lot was only half full when they arrived, which gave her hope for a quick visit. Supporting her weakened son as they walked through the sliding glass doors, she noticed how he leaned heavily against her, his usually bright eyes now dull with fever. The waiting room held just a few other patients: an elderly man reading a magazine, a mother with a toddler who appeared to have a minor rash, and a teenager holding an ice pack to his wrist. At the front desk, she was met with an immediate shift in atmosphere. The 2 staff members behind the counter exchanged glances that made her stomach tighten. Despite her professional attire and clearly organized paperwork, they seemed to look through her rather than at her. "Fill these out," the older receptionist said flatly, sliding a stack of forms across the counter without making eye contact. "Wait time's about 3 hours." 3 hours? She questioned, trying to keep her voice level while supporting her son's increasingly warm body against her side. "But there's hardly anyone here, and my son's fever is dangerously high." The younger receptionist barely glanced up from her computer screen. "That's the current wait time. You can either wait or try somewhere else." Her tone carried a dismissive edge that felt like a slap. As they found seats in the waiting area, she watched as a family who had just walked in was immediately processed and taken to the back. Their paperwork hadn't even been completed yet. The iniquity of the situation wasn't lost on her, but her focus remained on her son, who had started shivering despite the warm room. She pulled out her phone to document the time of their arrival and began taking notes about her son's symptoms and the staff's behavior, something her own mother had taught her to do in medical situations. A lifetime of similar experiences had trained her to be prepared, to document everything. As she wrote, she gently rubbed her son's back, humming softly the same lullaby that had soothed him as a baby. Other patients continued to arrive, check in, and be called back while they waited. Each time the door opened, she looked up hopefully, only to feel her heart sink as another name was called. Her son's condition wasn't improving, and she could feel the heat from his fever through his light cotton t-shirt. An hour passed, then another. The waiting room had cycled through several groups of patients, many of whom had arrived well after them. Each time she approached the desk to inquire about their wait, she was met with the same cold dismissal and vague excuses about triage protocols and staffing issues. Her son's breathing had become more labored, and his usual chatty personality had disappeared entirely. He hadn't even responded when she offered him his favorite dinosaur. As a mother, she knew in her bones that something was very wrong, and as an educated professional, she understood that this delay in care was far from normal protocol. What had started as concern was rapidly evolving into something more urgent, more desperate. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, continue to wait and hope they'd eventually be seen, or take more drastic action. Looking at her son's increasingly pale face, she knew she couldn't wait much longer. Something had to change, and it had to change soon. The clock on the waiting room wall ticked past another hour as the mother gently dabbed her son's forehead with a damp paper towel from the bathroom. She'd been counting the patients. 17 people had come in after them and already been called back for treatment. Her son's fever hadn't dropped, and his usual energetic spirit had faded into a concerning stillness. She was arranging her son's jacket into a makeshift pillow when she overheard it. The conversation drifted from behind the front desk, just loud enough to reach her ears. "They'd always come in like this," one staff member muttered to another, "acting like everything's an emergency, demanding immediate attention." These people need to learn to wait their turn. The words hit her like a physical blow. In that moment, she felt the familiar ache of recognition, the realization that once again, she and her child were being judged not by the urgency of their medical need, but by something far more insidious. Her hands, still adjusting her son's jacket, began to tremble, not with fear, but with a rising determination. Taking a deep breath, she reached for her phone and opened the camera app, then gently spoke to her drowsy son. "Sweetie, Mommy needs to talk to the people at the desk again. Can you hold on to Mr. Diner for me?" She tucked his beloved stuffed animal closer to him, making sure he was stable in the chair before standing up. As she approached the desk, she held her phone naturally at her side, the camera recording. Years of similar experiences had taught her the importance of documentation. The younger receptionist looked up with obvious annoyance. "Yes." "I need to speak with a supervisor," the mother said firmly, her voice steady despite the emotion building in her chest. "We've been waiting for over 2 hours while other patients who arrived after us have been seen. My son's condition is getting worse." "The supervisor is busy," the receptionist replied dismissively. "And like we told you before, we're following our standard triage procedures." "Standard procedures?" The mother's voice remained controlled but carried an edge of steel. "I've been watching your standard procedures for 2 hours now. I've counted 17 patients who came in after us and were taken back. I'm a teacher. I know how to keep accurate records." The older receptionist joined her colleague at the desk. "Ma'am, if you're going to be difficult, we can call security." "Please do," the mother responded, now holding her phone openly. "Call security. Call your supervisor. Call whoever you want, because I've been recording how you treat patients in this clinic, and I've documented every single person who's come through those doors in the last 2 hours. I'd love to discuss these standard procedures with anyone willing to review them." A hush fell over the waiting room. Other patients looked up from their phones and magazines, some nodding in quiet support, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The receptionists exchanged nervous glances. "Are you threatening us?" the younger one asked, her previous dismissiveness giving way to defensive anger. "I'm advocating for my sick child," the mother corrected her. "And I'm shining a light on how you're choosing to treat patients in a medical facility. Now I'll ask one more time. I need to speak with a supervisor about my son's condition." The older receptionist reached for the phone, but before she could make a call, a commotion from the waiting area drew everyone's attention. The mother turned to see her son slumped forward in his chair, his breathing noticeably labored. "Baby?" she called out, rushing back to him. The stuffed dinosaur had fallen to the floor, and her son's skin felt hotter than ever. Other patients stood up in concern, and one elderly woman approached with a cup of water. "He needs help right now." Someone called from across the waiting room. "What's wrong with you people?" The mother lifted her son into a more upright position, her heart pounding as she felt the heat radiating from his small body. Looking back at the desk staff, who were now watching with a mix of concern and defensiveness, she made a decision. Her voice carried clearly across the waiting room as she pulled out her phone again, this time to make a call that would change everything. "Since this clinic refuses to provide medical care to my son," she announced, her finger hovering over the keypad, "I'm calling 911. And I want everyone here to witness why this became necessary." As she began to dial, she noticed the older receptionist finally reaching for the internal phone, presumably to call for medical staff. But it was too late. The damage had been done, the trust had been broken, and a mother's patience had reached its limit. The next few minutes would set in motion events that would expose more than just one afternoon of negligence at a local urgent care clinic. The mother's hands trembled as she dialed 911, her son's head resting heavily against her shoulder. The waiting room had grown quiet, with other patients watching the scene unfold with a mixture of concern and discomfort. Her boy's breathing had become shallow and rapid, each breath seeming to require more effort than the last. "My son needs immediate medical attention," she spoke into the phone, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We've been waiting at Riverside Urgent Care for over 2 hours, and his condition is getting worse by the minute." She described his symptoms, the dangerously high fever, the labored breathing, the increasing lethargy, while gently stroking his back. The front desk staff finally showed signs of concern, but only after realizing emergency services were being called from within their own facility. The older receptionist stood up, clutching a clipboard as if it were a shield. "Ma'am, if you'll just wait." "No more waiting," the mother cut in, her voice carrying the weight of every ignored plea from the past 2 hours. "My child is seriously ill, and you've chosen to ignore us. Now you can explain your actions to the EMTs." Within minutes, the distinctive wail of sirens filled the air outside the clinic. 2 EMTs burst through the sliding doors with their equipment, their purposeful entrance a stark contrast to the clinic staff's previous inaction. The lead EMT, a woman with gentle hands and fierce eyes, immediately began assessing the boy's condition. "How long has he been like this?" she asked, wrapping a blood pressure cuff around his small arm while her partner checked his temperature and oxygen levels. "His fever started this morning," the mother explained, watching as they worked. "It just kept getting worse. We've been sitting here since 3 o'clock." Her voice cracked slightly, the strain of the afternoon finally showing through her composed exterior. The second EMT looked up sharply from his readings. "That's almost 3 hours ago." He exchanged a meaningful look with his partner as he noted the boy's vital signs. "Temps 104.2, oxygen saturation's lower than we'd like." The lead EMT made a quick decision. "We're transporting him to Memorial Hospital. He needs immediate attention." She turned to the mother, her voice softening. "You did the right thing calling us. He's showing signs of severe respiratory distress." As they transferred the boy onto the stretcher, the clinic's manager finally emerged from the back office, drawn by the commotion. He started to speak, but the lead EMT cut him off with a sharp look. "You'll be receiving an incident report about this. There's no excuse for leaving a child in this condition waiting for hours." The mother climbed into the ambulance alongside her son, clutching his small hand as the EMTs continued their work. Through the rear windows, she could see the cluster of clinic staff watching, their faces a mix of shame and defensiveness. The mother's attention turned back to her son as one of the EMTs placed an oxygen mask over his face. During the ride to Memorial Hospital, the EMTs worked efficiently while explaining everything they were doing. They started an IV to help with the dehydration, monitored his vital signs, and kept him stable. The mother answered their questions about his medical history, her voice growing stronger as she finally felt her son was getting the care he needed. "Has anything like this happened before?" the lead EMT asked while adjusting the oxygen flow. "Never this severe," the mother replied, watching her son's chest rise and fall. "He's had the occasional cold, but this came on so fast." She paused, then added quietly, "We should have been seen right away at that clinic." They just didn't seem to care." The EMTs exchanged knowing looks. They'd seen this before, the subtle and not so subtle ways certain patients were made to wait, were made to feel less worthy of care. The lead EMT squeezed the mother's shoulder gently. "You're absolutely right. This should have been treated as urgent from the start." At Memorial Hospital, a team was waiting for them at the emergency entrance. The head doctor, after hearing the EMT's report, immediately ordered a chest X-ray and blood work. Within an hour, the diagnosis was clear: severe pneumonia, complicated by the delay in treatment. If he'd been treated earlier, the emergency room doctor explained, her face serious but kind, "we might have prevented it from progressing this far. He's going to need to stay in the hospital for a few days." The mother sat by her son's bedside in the pediatric ward, watching as the antibiotics and fluids slowly began to take effect. His breathing had already improved with proper treatment, though he remained feverish. A nurse brought her a cup of coffee and a sandwich, insisting she needed to keep up her strength too. As her son finally fell into a more peaceful sleep, the mother pulled out her phone. She looked at the videos she'd taken at the clinic, the dismissive attitudes, the clear pattern of other patients being called ahead of them, the growing desperation in her own voice as she advocated for her child. With trembling fingers, she began to type out a detailed account of what had happened. This wasn't just about one afternoon of poor treatment anymore. This was about making sure no other parent would have to watch their child suffer while being ignored and dismissed. As she wrote, her son's monitors beeped steadily in the background, each sound a reminder of how close they'd come to a much worse outcome, and how determined she was to create change. The video spread like wildfire across social media platforms. By the time the mother's son was showing his first signs of improvement in the hospital, her phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. What started as a few shares among local community groups had exploded into a nationwide conversation about healthcare discrimination. In the video, the clear dismissal of a sick child's needs was impossible to ignore. The waiting room footage showed the steady stream of other patients being called ahead, the mother's increasingly desperate pleas, and the staff's callous responses. But it was the final moments, the arrival of EMTs and their obvious shock at the child's condition, that truly sparked public outrage. Local news vans gathered outside Riverside Urgent Care the next morning. The mother, exhausted from a night at her son's hospital bedside, watched the coverage on the small TV in his room. The clinic's spokesperson appeared on screen, reading a prepared statement about investigating the incident and taking appropriate measures. The words rang hollow against the reality of what had happened. "Mom," her son called softly from the hospital bed, his voice stronger than it had been the day before. "Those people on TV are talking about us." His innocent question brought tears to her eyes. She hadn't wanted this spotlight. She had only wanted proper medical care for her child. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from a local civil rights attorney who had seen the video. "Your experience isn't isolated," the message read. "We've received dozens of similar complaints about regional healthcare network facilities. Would you be willing to talk?" As she read through her messages, she discovered others sharing their own stories. A grandfather who had been made to wait hours for chest pain treatment. A pregnant woman who had been dismissed until she nearly lost her baby. A teenager whose broken arm was left untreated, while others with minor injuries were seen first. The pattern was unmistakable. The community response grew stronger by the hour. Local church groups organized prayer circles outside the hospital. Her teacher colleagues created a meal train to ensure she could stay at the hospital with her son. Former patients of the clinic began filing formal complaints with the state medical board, their voices emboldened by her video. Regional Healthcare Network's corporate office finally broke their silence with a lengthier statement promising a thorough investigation and immediate corrective action. But their words were drowned out by the flood of similar stories emerging across social media. Their other facilities came under scrutiny as people began sharing their own experiences of discrimination. A local news reporter approached her thoughtfully, asking if she would share her story on camera. After careful consideration, she agreed, not for attention, but for change. "This isn't about one incident or one clinic," she explained during the interview. "This is about a system that decides some lives matter less than others. My son could have died because of their prejudice." The interview aired during the evening news, her quiet dignity and clear documentation of events leaving no room for denial. The reporter had done additional research, uncovering disturbing patterns in wait times and treatment quality across regional healthcare networks facilities. The data confirmed what the stories had suggested: systematic discrimination had been business as usual. Healthcare advocacy groups reached out, offering support and resources. They helped her file formal complaints with state and federal agencies, ensuring every detail was properly documented. The state medical board announced an immediate investigation into the clinic's practices. In her son's hospital room, she read messages of support from around the country. People she had never met shared their own stories of medical discrimination, thanking her for having the courage to speak up. Local community leaders visited, promising to push for policy changes at the city level. "You did good, Mom," her son said sleepily as she tucked him in that night, his fever finally gone. The simple words from her child meant more than all the viral shares and news coverage combined. She hadn't set out to start a movement. She'd simply been a mother fighting for her child's life. The next day, more families came forward. They gathered in the hospital cafeteria, sharing their experiences with investigators and advocacy groups. Their stories painted a picture of long-standing discriminatory practices that could no longer be ignored or explained away. Regional Healthcare Network's board of directors called an emergency meeting. The clinic's entire management team was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. But the mother knew this was just the beginning. Real change would require more than just removing a few staff members or issuing apologetic statements. As she watched her son's strength return, she made a promise, not just to him, but to every family who had ever faced similar discrimination. This wouldn't be another incident swept under the rug. The spotlight she had reluctantly stepped into would become a beacon for change, illuminating the dark corners of healthcare inequality until every patient received the care they deserved. The state investigators arrived at Riverside Urgent Care early on a Monday morning, armed with laptops and stacks of documents. They weren't just looking into one incident anymore. They were digging into years of patient records, appointment logs, and waiting room data. What they found painted a picture far darker than anyone had initially suspected. In a small conference room turned temporary investigation headquarters, the lead investigator spread out printed charts across the table. The numbers told a story that couldn't be explained away by coincidence. Average wait times varied dramatically based on patients' racial background, with some groups consistently waiting 3 to 4 times longer than others for the same level of care. "Look at these treatment patterns," one investigator pointed out to her colleague, tracing her finger along a graph. "The disparities aren't just in wait times. They're in pain medication prescriptions, referrals to specialists, follow-up care recommendations. It's systematic." The clinic's internal emails revealed an even more troubling pattern. Staff members had been instructed to use certain codes in their scheduling system, seemingly innocent markers that actually identify patients by race and economic status. These codes determined who got pushed to the front of the line and who was left waiting. A former employee who had quit 6 months earlier came forward with her story. "I couldn't take it anymore," she explained to the investigators, her hands nervously twisting a tissue. "They trained us to use these codes, told us it was for resource management, but we all knew what it really meant. I tried to speak up once, but they threatened my job." The investigation spread to other facilities in the regional healthcare network. Similar patterns emerged across their urgent care centers, doctors' offices, and specialty clinics. The discrimination wasn't limited to one location or a few bad employees. It was baked into their entire system. In the pediatric ward where the mother's son was recovering, she met with advocacy group representatives who shared the preliminary findings. Her heart sank as she read through the data. Her experience hadn't been an isolated incident or a bad day at the clinic. It was part of a years-long pattern of systematic discrimination. "They've been doing this for at least 5 years, the advocacy group leader explained, showing her the charts. "Your video just finally made it impossible for them to deny it anymore. You gave other people the courage to come forward with their stories." The investigation uncovered training materials that taught staff how to discourage certain patients from seeking care without explicitly turning them away. Words like resource management and patient flow optimization were used to mask discriminatory practices. New employees were subtly pressured to follow these unwritten rules or risk losing their positions. The clinic's computer system held a goldmine of evidence. Every delayed appointment, every extended wait time, every rushed examination was recorded in cold, hard data. The investigators found that even patients with identical symptoms and insurance coverage received dramatically different treatment based solely on their racial background. One afternoon, as the mother sat with her son during his physical therapy session, she received a call from the lead investigator. "We're finding more than just negligence," the investigator explained. "This was an intentional system of discrimination. The board of directors can't claim they didn't know. We have emails showing they were aware of these practices for years." The mother watched her son working with the physical therapist, rebuilding his strength after the pneumonia that had nearly taken his life. She thought about all the other children who might have suffered similar or worse fates because of the clinic's discrimination. Her voice was steady as she responded to the investigator. "What can we do to make sure this never happens again?" The investigation's scope continued to expand. Former employees began coming forward in greater numbers, sharing stories of being pressured to participate in discriminatory practices. Some had documentation, saved emails, training materials, even recorded conversations that proved the systematic nature of the discrimination. Local news stations ran updated stories as new details emerged. The public's outrage grew with each revelation. Community leaders called for complete overhaul of the healthcare network's management and policies. Civil rights organizations began preparing class action lawsuits on behalf of affected patients. The mother started keeping a journal of everything that was uncovered. Each new piece of evidence confirmed what she had felt that day in the waiting room, that her son's life had been put at risk, not because of overworked staff or honest mistakes, but because of deliberate policies designed to discriminate. As the investigation neared its conclusion, the mother received another call, this time from a state health department official. "Your courage in speaking up has exposed problems that go far beyond one clinic," the official told her. "We're already drafting new regulations to prevent this from happening anywhere else in our state." The mother looked at her son, now almost fully recovered, doing his homework in the living room. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of interviews, meetings, and revelations. But seeing him healthy again reminded her why all of this mattered. This wasn't just about exposing past wrongs, it was about protecting future patients from ever facing the same discrimination. The conference room at Regional Healthcare Network's headquarters buzzed with nervous energy. Board members sat around the massive oak table, facing a room packed with community leaders, civil rights advocates, and healthcare experts. The mother who had started it all sat quietly in the front row, her now recovered son beside her, watching as real change began to unfold. "We're not here to just patch over the problems," announced the newly appointed CEO, a respected healthcare administrator known for turning troubled hospitals around. "We're here to rebuild our entire system from the ground up." She gestured to the detailed presentation displayed on the screen behind her, outlining comprehensive changes that would transform how the network operated. The first major change came in the form of mandatory training, not the superficial kind that employees could click through in an afternoon, but intensive, ongoing education led by experts in healthcare equity. Staff members from every level, from janitors to top administrators, gathered in small groups to learn and share experiences. During one training session, a nurse broke down in tears. "I knew something wasn't right," she admitted to her group, "but I didn't know how to speak up. Now I understand that staying silent made me part of the problem." Her honesty sparked similar confessions from others, creating moments of genuine understanding and commitment to change. The network implemented a new patient care monitoring system designed with input from civil rights organizations and healthcare advocacy groups. Every patient interaction would be tracked and analyzed for signs of disparate treatment. Wait times, treatment decisions, and outcomes would be regularly reviewed by an independent oversight committee. In the urgent care clinics, the physical spaces themselves began to change. Gone were the old signs with their confusing medical jargon. New, clear directions in multiple languages welcomed patients. The waiting rooms were reorganized to be more open and transparent, with digital displays showing real-time wait times and triage priorities. The mother received an invitation to join the newly formed Community Advisory Board. "We need your voice," the new CEO had told her. "You showed us what courage looks like. Now help us make sure we never need that kind of courage again." She accepted, determined to ensure these changes would be more than just window dressing. Training sessions weren't just about avoiding discrimination, they'd focused on building genuine understanding and empathy. Healthcare providers shared their own biases and learned from their mistakes. Role-playing exercises helped staff members understand how their actions and attitudes affected patient care. "Remember that day," a doctor said during one session, addressing her colleagues. "Remember how close we came to losing a child because of our biases? That's not who we are supposed to be as healers." Her words resonated through the room, touching hearts and changing minds. The network's hiring practices underwent a complete overhaul. They actively recruited diverse healthcare providers and administrators, creating pathways for advancement that had been previously blocked by systemic barriers. Mentorship programs were established to support and retain staff from underrepresented backgrounds. Technology played a crucial role in the transformation. New software helped identify patterns of discrimination before they could take root. Patient feedback systems were redesigned to be more accessible and responsive. Every complaint was treated as an opportunity to improve. In the urgent care waiting rooms, staff members now wore badges with their names clearly displayed, making them more accountable for their interactions with patients. The old coding system that had been used to discriminate was replaced with a transparent triage process based solely on medical need. The mother's son, fully recovered and back in school, drew a picture of his experience. It showed two different waiting rooms, one dark and unwelcoming, the other bright and full of smiling faces. "This is how it was," he explained, pointing to the first drawing, "and this is how it is now." His simple artwork became a powerful symbol of the transformation, displayed prominently in the network's main office. Community outreach programs expanded rapidly. Mobile health clinics began visiting underserved neighborhoods. Health education programs were offered in multiple languages. The network's resources were finally being used to serve all communities equally. Regular audits and assessments kept everyone accountable. External evaluators reviewed patient outcomes, conducting detailed analyses to ensure the changes were making a real difference. The results were made public, maintaining transparency and trust with the community. The mother watched all of this unfold with cautious optimism. She saw how the staff's attitudes were genuinely changing, how the new procedures were becoming routine, how patients from all backgrounds were receiving equal care. It wasn't perfect. Change never is, but it was real progress, built on a foundation of accountability and respect. 1 year had passed since that fateful day in the urgent care waiting room. The mother stood at a podium in the state capitol building, her son sitting proudly in the front row. Behind her, the governor held a pen, ready to sign new legislation that would transform healthcare practices across the state. "My son almost lost his life because of discrimination," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the crowded chamber. "But today, we're making sure that no other family will face what we faced." The room was packed with healthcare advocates, community leaders, and families who had shared similar experiences. Many held back tears as she spoke. The new law, already being called the Fair Care Act by local media, required all healthcare facilities to implement strict anti-discrimination policies, regular staff training, and transparent reporting of patient wait times and treatment decisions. The mother's experience had become the catalyst for change far beyond one clinic or healthcare network. Back at Riverside Urgent Care, the transformation was striking. The waiting room that had once been a place of anxiety and discrimination now buzzed with professional, attentive activity. New staff members, hired after the previous team's dismissal, moved efficiently between patients, treating everyone with equal respect and urgency. A young resident doctor approached the mother after the ceremony. "I read about your story in medical school," she said, her eyes bright with emotion. "It changed how I think about patient care. Now I teach my students that medical expertise means nothing without compassion and equality." The mother's son had not only recovered fully but had found his own voice. In his school, he started a group called Kids Care Too, where children learned about healthcare rights and how to advocate for themselves and others. His teachers marveled at how he had transformed a traumatic experience into something positive. Regional Healthcare Network had become a national model for institutional change. Healthcare administrators from across the country visited to learn from their transformation. The mother's video, which had once exposed their failures, was now used in training sessions nationwide as a powerful reminder of why these changes mattered. "It's not just about new rules and policies," the network's CEO explained during a healthcare conference. "It's about changing hearts and minds. Every patient who walks through our doors deserves the same high standard of care, period." The audience included many who had been skeptical that real change was possible. Now they were taking notes. The scholarship fund established in honor of the mother and son's experience had already helped 5 students from underrepresented communities begin their medical training. One of them, a first-year medical student, shared her story at the fund's annual dinner. "I watched that video when it went viral," the student said, gesturing to the mother and the audience. "I was already dreaming of becoming a doctor, but seeing how one person's courage could create such change, that showed me the kind of doctor I want to be." State health inspectors now conducted regular, unannounced visits to all urgent care facilities. Their reports showed a significant decrease in discriminatory practices across the board. The mother's documentation methods had been incorporated into their official oversight procedures. The mother's teaching colleagues had rallied around her cause, incorporating healthcare advocacy into their curriculum. Children learned about their rights in age-appropriate ways, understanding that speaking up against unfairness was not just right, it was necessary. Local community groups that had supported the mother during her ordeal had grown into a powerful advocacy network. They provided support to other families facing healthcare discrimination, ensuring no one had to fight these battles alone. "Remember when you held my hand in that hospital room?" her son asked one evening as they looked through a scrapbook of their journey. "I was scared, but you weren't." She smiled, remembering how frightened she had actually been. "I was terrified," she admitted. "But sometimes being brave means acting strong even when you're scared." The former clinic staff members who had discriminated against them faced professional consequences, but more importantly, they had to confront the real impact of their actions. Some had gone through intensive retraining and now spoke at medical conferences about the dangers of bias in healthcare. On the anniversary of that difficult day, the mother and son visited the transformed urgent care clinic. The walls displayed new artwork created by local children, celebrating diversity and inclusion. In the waiting room, a plaque told their story, not as a tale of discrimination, but as a testament to the power of speaking up and fighting for change. As they left the clinic, a young parent approached them. "I recognize you from the story," she said softly. "I just wanted you to know, my child received wonderful care here last week. What you did, it made a difference. It really did." The mother squeezed her son's hand as they walked to their car. One moment of injustice had sparked a movement, one voice had inspired thousands, and one mother's love for her child had helped transform a broken system. Their story would continue to inspire others, reminding everyone that positive change was possible when people found the courage to stand up for what was right.